The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the soft notes of a distant piano melody that danced through the cafe. I sat in my usual spot by the window, the autumn light casting gentle shadows across the table. It was here that I often found solace, a quiet refuge amidst the swirling chaos of my mind. Yet, today, even this sanctuary felt invaded by the weight of my thoughts. It had been months since I had filed for divorce, a decision that came like a thief in the night, stealing away the remnants of my once happy life. I had left without a word of explanation, leaving him bewildered and hurt, his eyes searching mine for answers that I could not give. I watched him from afar as he tried to piece together his life, step by painful step, until he found her. Aya. Aya, with her gentle smile and kind heart, a balm to his wounded spirit. They married under the cherry blossoms, petals fluttering like confetti around them. It was a scene pulled from a dream, one that should have filled me with peace, knowing he was happy. But instead, it only deepened the chasm of my guilt. I remember the day I told him the truth. The sky was a dull gray, mirroring the heaviness in my chest. We sat across from each other at a small, unassuming cafe, the kind that served as a backdrop to countless conversations between strangers. Our words were anything but mundane. "I owe you an explanation," I began, my voice barely rising above a whisper. His eyes, those familiar pools of warmth and understanding, softened as they met mine, encouraging yet bracing for impact. I told him everything, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the fear that had gnawed at my insides like a ravenous beast. I had chosen to face it alone, believing it would spare him the burden of watching me wither away. But in my attempt to protect him, I had only created a deeper wound. His reaction was not one of the anger I had braced myself for. Instead, he reached across the table, his hand enveloping mine with a gentleness that shattered me. "Why didn't you let me be there for you?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "We could have faced it together." His words were like a balm and a blade, soothing and slicing through the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart. In that moment, I realized the depth of my miscalculation. By trying to spare him, I had only isolated myself further, robbing us both of precious time together. The days that followed were a blur of apologies and shared tears. I watched him grapple with the truth, the realization of what had been taken from us, and yet he remained steadfast in his resolve to support me. It was Aya, however, who surprised me the most. She reached out to me, a gesture of grace I could barely comprehend. Aya, with her unwavering compassion, offered her friendship without hesitation. It was her presence that taught me the true meaning of forgiveness, not just of others, but of oneself. Through her, I found the strength to confront my own fears, to accept the love and support I had once pushed away. Each day became a lesson in vulnerability, in allowing myself to be seen, flaws and all. It was not an easy path, but it was one I walked with growing determination. As the leaves turned from green to gold, I found a new rhythm to life, one that embraced both the beauty and the impermanence of each moment. I began to cherish the small things, a shared laugh, a quiet afternoon, the warmth of a hand held in mine. In the end, I learned that love is not about shielding those we care about from pain, but walking with them through it, hand in hand. It was a lesson that came at a great cost, but one that brought me closer to the person I was meant to be. The cafe's door chimed, signaling the arrival of a new customer. I glanced up to see him walk in, his smile a beacon of light that cut through the shadows of the past. He joined me at the table, his presence a reminder of the journey we had taken together. A journey that, despite its rocky beginnings, had led us to a place of understanding and peace. The cafe window reflected the soft amber glow of dusk, casting long, languid shadows over the table where I sat alone, nursing a cup of cooling coffee. The familiar hum of conversations, clinking cutlery, and the hiss of the espresso machine created a comforting background noise, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in the labyrinth of what-ifs and maybes that had become my life. When I filed for divorce, I had convinced myself it was for the best. I had given him no reasons, offered no explanations, just a quiet, unsigned note left on the kitchen table. The truth was tangled and messy. a knot of fear and insecurity that I couldn't untangle even for myself. I had watched him marry her from afar, my heart a silent witness to vows that once were mine to share. It was a choice I made, a sacrifice I believed necessary, but one that had left me hollow. The cafe door chimed, a gentle intrusion of reality that pulled me back from my thoughts. I looked up to see Ryan entering, his presence as commanding as ever. His eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he regained his composure. He approached with the same grace that had once drawn me to him, a soft smile playing at the corners of his lips. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice a warm caress against the coldness of my solitude. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As he settled across from me, I took in the sight of him, the familiar lines of his face, the earnest depth of his gaze, and felt the ache of nostalgia in my chest. We exchanged pleasantries, each word a careful step around the chasm of our past. Then, in a moment of weakness, or perhaps courage, I found myself speaking. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, as if they had been waiting for this very moment. I told him everything, the reasons for my sudden departure, the fears that had coiled around my heart like a viper, and the truth I had hidden for so long. I laid bare the vulnerability I had kept locked away, hoping for understanding but fearing rejection. His expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, a profound sadness that mirrored my own. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving mine, absorbing every painful admission. When I finished, the silence between us was deafening, filled with the weight of unspoken emotions and the echoes of what had once been. "I wish you had told me," Ryan said finally, his voice a gentle lament. "I would have understood. We could have faced it together." His words were a balm and a dagger, soothing yet painfully reminding me of the path not taken. But they also held a promise, a glimmer of hope that perhaps it wasn't too late to find closure, if not reconciliation. The air between us felt charged with possibility, a fragile bridge spanning the gulf of our past decisions. I reached across the table, my hand hesitating before resting atop his. The touch was electric, a reminder of the connection we once had, and I realized that despite everything, a part of me would always care for him. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words heavy with sincerity and regret. His fingers curled around mine, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes more than words ever could. In that moment, I understood that while the past couldn't be rewritten, the future was still unwritten, a canvas waiting for us to decide whether to paint it together or apart. As we sat there, the world outside continued its relentless march forward. The cafe's patrons came and went, oblivious to the small universe contained within our shared gaze. The night deepened, stars beginning to peek through the indigo canopy of the sky, each one a tiny beacon of hope. We parted with promises of staying in touch, a tentative agreement to not let the silence stretch too long between us again. As I walked home, the chill of the evening air was a welcome clarity, each breath a reminder of the fresh start I had long denied myself. The truth had been spoken, and though it had broken me in ways I hadn't anticipated, it also set me free. In the tangled web of love and loss, pain and healing, I found a small measure of peace, and with it, the courage to embrace whatever came next. The rain had begun its gentle patter against the window, a symphony of droplets that mirrored the steady, rhythmic ache in my heart. It was late afternoon, and the gray clouds hung low, casting the world in a muted, melancholy hue. I sat on the sofa, clutching an old photograph, one where we were both laughing, a moment forever frozen in time. My fingers traced the outline of his face, a face I once knew so intimately. When I filed for divorce, I never imagined how the silence of my unspoken truth would echo so deeply within me. I had hoped that the dissolution would bring clarity, a sense of freedom from the chains of my own making. Instead, it was as if I had cut away a part of myself, leaving nothing but a raw wound that refused to heal. The decision to tell him the truth, after all these years, was not made lightly. It was a truth I had buried, a truth that had festered beneath the surface of our marriage like a hidden bruise. I could still remember the day I finally spoke the words. His eyes, usually so warm and inviting, regarded me with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I didn't know how to tell you," I had said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was protecting you, protecting us." The memory of his silence, the tautness of the air between us, was almost suffocating. I had prepared myself for anger, for the inevitable barrage of questions. Instead, there was just the quiet, a void that seemed to consume everything it touched. And then, not long after, he remarried. I watched from afar as he built a new life with her, a woman whose name I could never bring myself to say aloud. She was everything I wasn't. Carefree, luminous, her presence like a breath of fresh air. Part of me was relieved. Perhaps, I thought, he would find the happiness I had been unable to give him. But when I finally told him the truth that had gnawed at me for so long, it was as if I had shattered something irreparable. His voice, usually so steady and calm, broke like glass. "I wish you had told me," he said, his words heavy with a pain I could never have anticipated. I wish things could have been different." Those words lingered in my mind, haunting me like a ghost. They followed me through my days, whispered to me in the quiet moments of the night. I had thought that by protecting him from my secret, I was doing the right thing. But now, it seemed, I had only succeeded in hurting us both. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work, seeking solace in the routine and structure it provided. The characters I created on the page became my companions, their stories a refuge from my own. Yet, despite my best efforts, I could not escape the feeling of emptiness that loomed over me, an ever-present shadow. It was during one such lonely evening, as I sat staring blankly at my computer screen, that an unexpected message appeared. The sender was someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Mika, an old friend from university. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that tugged at something deep within me. "Hey, I heard you're back in town. Want to catch up?" Perhaps it was the loneliness that compelled me, or the need to reconnect with a piece of my past that had remained untouched. Either way, I found myself agreeing. The cafe where we met was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chill outside. Mika greeted me with a hug that was both familiar and comforting. Her presence was a balm, a reminder of happier times. As we talked, I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't expected. I spoke of the divorce, of the truth I had kept hidden for so long, of the emptiness that threatened to overwhelm me. Her response was gentle, her words like a soothing melody. "You made the choices you thought were right," she said, her eyes meeting mine with an understanding that brought a lump to my throat. "But maybe it's time to forgive yourself, to let go of the burden you've been carrying." Her words resonated within me, echoing in the hollow spaces of my heart. The journey to forgiveness, I realized, was not just about him. It was about me, about finding a way to heal the broken pieces and rediscover the person I once was. As I left the cafe, the rain had stopped, leaving the world refreshed and glistening under the soft light of the setting sun. It was a small moment, but in it, I felt a flicker of hope, a promise of renewal and the possibility of a new beginning. The rain poured relentlessly as I watched through the cafe's misty window, each drop blurring the sight of people scurrying under umbrellas. Somewhere amidst the city's labyrinthine chaos, Hiro was beginning anew with her. Yui, the woman he had chosen after me. It had been a month since their wedding, yet every detail of that day was etched into my mind with a clarity that felt both ironic and cruel. The ivory lace of her dress, the way Hiro's eyes shone with a happiness I once believed was reserved for us. I told myself, over and over, that it was for the best, that my leaving him without an explanation was an act of self-preservation. But underneath the facade of strength, a storm raged within me. The bell above the cafe door jingled, a sound that momentarily pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Akira, my childhood friend, stepping in, shaking the rain from his coat. He spotted me and offered a gentle, knowing smile before joining me at the small table nestled in the corner. "Still thinking about him?" he asked, eyes soft but probing. "Always," I replied, my voice barely rising above a whisper. Akira had been a constant in my life, a steady presence amid the tumultuous waves. He knew everything, or at least, almost everything. Even he did not know the real reason behind my decision to leave Hiro, a truth so heavy that it felt like a physical weight on my chest. "You deserve peace, you know," Akira said, his voice a balm against my raw edges. I nodded, though I couldn't find the words to agree. Silence stretched between us, comfortable yet charged with unspoken truths. I sipped my coffee, the warmth seeping through my fingers, grounding me just enough to muster a smile. "I'll be fine," I said, more to convince myself than him. "It just takes time, right?" "Time and honesty," Akira replied, his gaze piercing yet kind. "You can't keep running from the past, Ayumi." His words lingered in the air, intertwining with the cafe's ambient chatter. I knew he was right. I had been running, not just from Hiro, but from the part of myself that had been too afraid to face reality. The fear that had kept me silent, even as Hiro moved on without knowing the truth. As we left the cafe, the rain had ceased, leaving the city glistening under the streetlights. We walked in comfortable silence, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the cobblestones. Akira walked me to my apartment, his presence a shield against the encroaching loneliness. When I finally closed the door behind me, I was greeted by the quiet hum of my apartment, a stark contrast to the bustling world outside. My gaze wandered to the pile of letters stacked neatly on the table, letters I had written to Hiro but never sent. Each one an attempt to articulate the truth, the real reason I had left. I picked up the latest letter, the ink still fresh. The words stared back at me, taunting yet inviting. It was time to face what I had long denied. To tell Hiro the truth about the illness that had stolen my future, the diagnosis that had made me believe he deserved someone without an expiration date looming over their love. The decision to send the letter was both terrifying and liberating. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a strange sense of calm, as if the storm within me had finally begun to subside. I didn't know how Hiro would react, or if he would even understand. But I owed him the truth, and I owed myself the chance to finally move forward, free from the shadows of my past. The next morning, with the sun rising over the city, I dropped the letter into the postbox, watching as it disappeared into the depths. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of my choice settle into place. It was done. There was no turning back now. As I walked away, the city around me seemed different, the air lighter, the colors more vivid. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a whisper of possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could find healing in honesty. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new journey, one where I could finally embrace the truth and find peace in its light. The scent of sakura blossoms wafted through the open window, a fragrant reminder of both renewal and endings. I watched the petals flutter in the breeze, carried away, just as the remnants of my past had been. It had been months since I last saw him, standing beneath the cherry trees, the same trees we had once deemed ours. The divorce papers had been the first step, the catalyst to a future I had crafted without him, yet it was a future I had not truly desired. The decision to leave was not born out of anger or betrayal, but rather a secret, a burden I believed I must bear alone. I had promised myself that I would protect him from the truth, from the pain it would surely inflict. In the quiet of the night, I often wondered if I had made the right choice, if the sacrifice was worth the heartache that now enveloped my days. After the papers were signed and the reality of my solitude settled in, I saw him less and less. Our mutual friends hesitated to speak his name in my presence, their eyes filled with pity. I couldn't blame them. Even I struggled to understand the depths of my decision. But then he met her, and I saw a light return to his eyes. She was everything I was not, unburdened by secrets, free-spirited and radiant. I convinced myself that he was happier, that this was the life he deserved. I had built a fragile peace around this belief, until the day I found myself face to face with them at the festival. The streets were alive with laughter and music, a cacophony that seemed to echo the chaos in my heart. Her arm looped through his, their laughter mingling with the crowd. He looked different, older perhaps, or maybe it was simply that I was seeing him through the lens of lost time. Our eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the world fell away. The connection was still there, a thread that no amount of distance or silence could sever. Yet it was she who spoke first, her voice as sweet as the candies she held in her hand. "It's been a while," she said, her smile genuine, untainted by knowledge of the past. I nodded. The words caught in my throat, tangled with emotions I couldn't untangle. As they moved on, I felt the weight of my secret grow heavier, pressing against my chest with each step they took. I turned away, retreating to the solitude of my apartment, the sanctuary where I could hide from the world and my own regrets. Yet the silence was unbearable, each tick of the clock a reminder of time slipping away. That night, as the moon cast its silver glow over the city, I made a decision. It was time to confront the truth, to set both of us free from the binds of unspoken words. I could no longer bear the weight of knowing he lived a life built upon a lie. My heart raced as I dialed his number, each ring tightening the knot of anxiety in my stomach. When he answered, his voice was calm, as if he had been expecting my call. We agreed to meet at the park, beneath the cherry trees that had witnessed the best and worst of our love. I arrived early, the air crisp and cool as the sun dipped below the horizon. Each shadow seemed to whisper my fears, the rustle of leaves a symphony of uncertainty. He arrived, shortly after, his presence as steadying as it had always been. We sat in silence, the space between us filled with unspoken words. I took a deep breath, the confession heavy on my tongue. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I could feel his gaze upon me, patient and kind, urging me to continue. "I left because I was scared," I admitted, the truth unraveling like a thread pulled too tight. "I was afraid of what it would mean for you, for us. I thought it would be easier to let you go, to let you find happiness without the burden I carried." He was silent, absorbing my words, the weight of them settling between us. "What burden?" he asked, his voice steady, yet I could hear the tremor of emotion beneath. "It doesn't matter now," I replied, my heart aching with the knowledge that I had already taken too much from him. "I just needed you to know that it was never because I stopped loving you." His eyes softened, and for a moment I saw a glimmer of the man I had once known, the man I still loved. "I wish you had told me sooner," he said quietly. "I wish we could have faced it together." Tears blurred my vision, and I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As we sat together beneath the cherry trees, I realized that while the past could not be changed, the future was still unwritten. The truth had broken me, but perhaps, in its wake, I could find the strength to heal. The rain tapped incessantly against my window, as if it were in sync with the rhythm of my heart. Each droplet a reminder of what I had once lost, what I had let slip through my fingers without uttering a single word of explanation. It had been 6 months since the divorce papers were signed. 6 months since I had watched him walk away, confusion etched into his features. I told myself it was for the best, that he would be happier without the weight of my secret pulling him down. Yet, here I was, a shadow of my former self, haunted by memories that refused to fade. I often wondered if he ever thought of me in the quiet moments before sleep claimed him, or if she now occupied every corner of his mind. The thought was a bitter pill to swallow, one that lodged itself in my throat and refused to dissolve. I first saw them together at the park. Her laughter was a melody that danced on the air, and his eyes sparkled in a way I had not seen in years. The sight should have brought me some semblance of peace, reassurance that I had made the right choice. Instead, it was like a dagger to my heart, twisting with every step they took together, hand in hand. Days turned into weeks, each one more unbearable than the last. My friends, bless their hearts, tried to pull me from the abyss I had willingly thrown myself into. "You need closure," they would say, not understanding that closure was a luxury I could not afford. It wasn't until I received the invitation that I realized the truth I had so desperately hidden from him had to be revealed. The wedding was a grand affair, a celebration of love and new beginnings. I sat at the back, an uninvited ghost, my heart clenching with every vow exchanged. As they kissed, sealing their promises with a gentle brush of lips, I felt the last remnants of our shared past shatter like glass around me. It was in that moment, amidst the applause and cheers, that I knew I could no longer remain silent. The truth had to come to light, no matter the cost. I found him alone later, his face aglow with the happiness of the day. His smile faltered when he saw me, replaced by an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Why?" he asked, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 questions. Tears welled in my eyes, and I struggled to find the words that had eluded me for so long. "I was sick," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to burden you. I thought letting you go would be easier, safer." His eyes widened, disbelief mingling with anger and something else, pity. It was the last thing I wanted, and it was more than I could bear. The reality of what I had done, the pain I had caused him, was suffocating. "You should have told me," he said, his voice a mixture of betrayal and sorrow. "We could have faced it together." The truth hung between us, raw and exposed. There was no going back, no undoing the damage I had wrought. The weight of my decision pressed down on me, and I realized that in trying to protect him, I had only succeeded in breaking us both. He turned away then, his retreating figure a testament to the chasm I had created. I watched him walk back to the celebration, to her, and knew I had lost him forever. The rain began to fall again, a fitting backdrop to the tears that now flowed freely down my cheeks. As I stood there, alone in the aftermath of my choices, I realized that this was my penance. I had to live with the consequences of my silence, the bitter truth of my own making. But perhaps, in time, there would be a chance for healing, for forgiveness, for both of us. Until then, I would carry the memory of what could have been, a silent reminder of the love I had willingly let go. The soft patter of rain against my window was a lullaby I had grown accustomed to since the day I signed those divorce papers. It was as if the sky had chosen to mirror the tears I couldn't shed, an external echo of my internal storm. I sat there, tracing the raindrops as they raced each other to the sill, my mind a tumultuous sea of memories and regrets. I remember the day I filed for divorce as clearly as if it were yesterday. The gray morning had matched my mood. Everything felt muted, as if the world itself had lost its color. I had walked into the courthouse with the kind of resolve that masks desperation, clutching the papers to my chest like a shield. I couldn't tell him why, not then. It was a truth that clung to my heart like a secret lover, whispering its reasons only to me. We had been happy once, or at least I thought we were. Our love was a tapestry woven with the threads of laughter and shared dreams. But somewhere along the way, a thread had snagged, pulling the fabric of our life apart at the seams. I was the one to pull it, unraveling us. It wasn't long after the divorce that he met her. She was everything I wasn't. Vibrant, open, unguarded. Watching them together was like observing a painting come to life. Their love was a masterpiece of vivid hues and broad strokes. I watched from the shadows, an unseen spectator to the life I had forfeited. The day they married was bright and clear, a stark contrast to the gray cloud that hovered over me. I stood at a distance, hidden behind the blooming cherry blossoms that lined the path to the chapel. As they exchanged vows, I felt a pang so deep it threatened to consume me whole. Yet, I remained silent, bound by the chains of my own making. It was only later, when the echo of their happiness had faded into the night, that I found my voice. I asked him to meet me at the old pier, where the ocean sang a mournful song against the rocks. The moon hung low, casting a silvery light that danced across the waves. It was there, under that ethereal glow, that I finally told him the truth. "I'm sick," I whispered, the words barely audible above the ocean's roar. "I found out just before everything." He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. The moonlight caught the glint of tears as they welled up, threatening to spill over. I could see the gears turning in his mind, trying to comprehend the weight of my confession. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked, a fissure in the facade of strength he had always worn so well. "I couldn't bear the thought of you staying out of pity," I replied, my voice fragile like the sea foam dancing along the shore. I wanted you to be happy, to live your life without the burden of my illness. He turned away, his silhouette stark against the shimmering sea. I watched as he struggled with his emotions, the silent battle raging within him. It was a long time before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "You broke me," he said, the words heavy with a sorrow that matched my own. "I thought I lost you because I wasn't enough. I didn't know it was because you were trying to protect me." The truth lay between us like a living thing, breathing in the space we once called ours. It was the first time I had seen him so vulnerable, stripped of the defenses he had erected in my absence. In that moment, I realized how deeply I had wounded him, how my silence had been its own form of cruelty. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moving, afraid that any motion might shatter the fragile understanding we had reached. The ocean continued its relentless serenade, a reminder that life, like the tides, was ever-changing, relentless, and beautiful in its own tragic way. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we parted ways, each carrying the weight of our own choices. Yet, in that shared silence, there was a glimmer of something new, a possibility of healing, of forgiveness. Perhaps, in time, we could find peace within the storm we had weathered together, even as we walked separate paths under the same sky. The rain drummed steadily against my window, a gentle yet incessant reminder of the storm brewing within me. It had been 2 years since I handed him those papers, the ink barely dry as I walked away from the life we had built together. My heart, once a vibrant tapestry of warmth and love, now felt like a landscape ravaged by winter's chill. His name was Kaito, and he was my everything. Our story began like any other, an unassuming meeting at a quaint coffee shop, eyes locking over steaming cups of coffee, laughter that echoed through the small space like music. We were young and foolish, driven by the kind of love that felt invincible. But as time passed, life's relentless tide began to erode the edges of our perfect world. I filed for divorce without a word, without a whisper of explanation. It was an act that seemed cruel even to me, but I was trapped between the truth and its unbearable weight. I watched from a distance as he struggled to understand, his eyes searching for an answer I couldn't give. It was for his own good, I convinced myself, a lie I repeated until it became a hollow mantra. The day he married her, a woman named Akari, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She was everything I wasn't, serene, composed, a radiant beam of light that illuminated the darkest corners of his life. I watched the ceremony from afar, hidden among the guests, my presence a ghostly shadow lingering on the fringes of their happiness. As they exchanged vows, I clutched the remnants of my heart, each beat a painful reminder of what I had lost. As the seasons changed, so did the landscape of my life. I moved to a new city, started anew, yet the specter of my past followed me relentlessly. It was during one of these restless nights that I found myself writing a letter, a confession, a desperate plea for understanding. The truth, once buried deep within me, demanded to be heard. I was scared, I wrote, terrified of what the future held, of the shadows that lurked in the corners of my mind. I didn't want you to carry my burdens, to be weighed down by my fears. So I let you go, hoping you would find happiness without me. I sealed the letter with trembling hands, unsure if I would ever have the courage to send it. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A chance encounter with an old friend became the catalyst for change. She spoke of Kaito, of how he seemed happy yet distant, a man haunted by the ghosts of his past. Her words pierced my heart, a painful reminder of the impact of my choices. It was then that I made the decision to confront the truth, to reveal the scars I had hidden for so long. I found myself standing outside their home, the familiar facade both comforting and daunting. As I raised my hand to knock, memories flooded back, of laughter shared on lazy afternoons, of whispered promises made under starlit skies. The door opened, and there he stood, his eyes widening in shock and something else. Hope, perhaps? Kaito, I breathed, my voice barely above a whisper. There's something I need to tell you. He nodded, leading me inside. The air was thick with unspoken words, the silence a living entity that wrapped around us both. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The reason I left, I began, my voice trembling, wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I was afraid of dragging you down with me, of the darkness that clung to me like a second skin. His gaze softened, understanding dawning in his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice a mixture of pain and relief. I didn't want to hurt you, I replied, tears blurring my vision. But in trying to protect you, I hurt you more than I ever imagined. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of my confession settling between us. And then, slowly, he reached out, his hand enveloping mine in a gesture so familiar, so achingly tender, that it undid me completely. I'm broken, I admitted, the words spilling from my lips like a dam finally giving way. But I never stopped loving you. Kaito's grip tightened, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. Then let's piece it back together, he said softly, his voice a promise, a balm to my wounded soul. In that moment, as the rain continued its steady rhythm outside, I felt something shift within me, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light breaking through the darkness. It was the beginning of a journey, one filled with uncertainty and fear, but also with the possibility of healing and love. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe in the future, in the promise of what could be. And as we sat there, side by side, I realized that perhaps, our story wasn't over after all. The cherry blossoms fell like rain the day I handed him the envelope. Each petal a whisper of a past we shared, each step away from him a decision weighed heavy with untold truths. I remember his eyes, usually so warm, clouded with confusion as he took the papers from me. There were no words, just a silence that stretched between us, a chasm filled with all the things I couldn't say. For weeks, I wandered the streets of our city, a ghost in my own life. The bustling sounds of Tokyo enveloped me, but I felt detached, like I was watching my life unfold from behind glass. I knew he'd find someone else. I told myself it was what I wanted, what he deserved, happiness, even if it wasn't with me. But when I heard he was marrying her, my heart twisted in ways I hadn't anticipated. I attended their wedding. I stood at the back, hidden among the crowd of well-wishers. She was beautiful, her laughter a melody that seemed to harmonize with his, and he looked happy, genuinely so, his eyes sparkling with a light that had dimmed during our last months together. As they exchanged vows, I felt like a shadow, a lingering specter of what once was. The truth was a burden I carried alone, a secret that gnawed at my insides. I told myself it was for his own good, that he didn't need to be dragged into my darkness. But as I watched them dance, the weight of my silence became suffocating. I slipped away from the reception, finding solace beneath a cherry tree, its branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. It was there that he found me, his footsteps quiet on the grass. I hadn't expected him to notice my absence, let alone seek me out. His presence was warmth on a cold night, a reminder of all I had walked away from. Why? His voice was soft, a gentle inquiry that held no accusation, only the need for understanding. I hesitated, the word caught in my throat. I thought it was for the best. For who? I couldn't meet his gaze. For you. He sighed, a sound laden with the weight of our shared history. You never gave me a chance to decide that for myself. The truth hovered on my lips, a truth I had buried beneath layers of pride and fear. I was sick, I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want you to see me fade away. He moved closer, the scent of his cologne mingling with the floral air. You thought I would leave you? No, I replied, tears blurring my vision. I was afraid you wouldn't. He gently lifted my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. You should have told me. I nodded, the realization of my mistake crashing over me like a tidal wave. I know. For a moment, we stood there, Two souls connected by invisible threads, yet separated by choices made and words left unsaid. It was then that I saw her, standing at a distance, her expression unreadable. She didn't approach, didn't interrupt. Instead, she turned and walked back inside, leaving us to our reckoning. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my remorse. He shook his head, his expression one of profound sadness. "It's too late for that now." And with those words, he turned away, leaving me beneath the tree, surrounded by fallen petals, each one a memory of a love lost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I understood the finality of what I had done. There was no going back, only forward into an uncertain future that I had chosen for myself. The city lights flickered on, casting long shadows on the path ahead. I took a step, then another, determined to find my way in the world I had reshaped with my own hands. Perhaps one day I would find peace. But for now, all I could do was walk, each step an echo of the choices I had made, the silence I had kept, and the truth that had finally set me free. The evening sky draped a canvas of deep purples and shimmering golds above me as I stood on the balcony of my modest apartment, watching the city lights flicker into life. The cool breeze carried, the scent of cherry blossoms, a reminder of fleeting beauty, a fitting parallel to my life. My heart felt like a glass orb in a tempest, fragile and exposed. The sound of distant laughter drifted upwards, mocking the silence that had settled into my world. It had been months since I last saw him. Kaido, with his stormy eyes and a smile that once promised eternity. We had shared dreams, whispered under the glow of moonlit nights, and built castles in the air. But dreams sometimes shatter like brittle glass, and I had been the one to cast the first stone. I filed for divorce without explaining why, left him with nothing but the fading echo of my footsteps. It seemed kinder at the time. The words I couldn't say were trapped in the prison of my heart, caged by fear. Fear of hurting him, fear of the truth, and most of all, fear of seeing the light die in his eyes. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface, and mine was no different. The day I saw him with her, my breath, caught in my throat. She was beautiful in an effortless way, her laughter like the tinkling of wind chimes. They looked happy, a picture of what I could never be. I had hoped that by leaving, I was setting him free to find a happiness I couldn't give. Yet, as I watched them exchange vows beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms, the truth burned within me like a curse. I was alone now, a shadow in the recesses of their story. The world continued to spin, indifferent to the chaos within my soul. It was in this solitude that I found unexpected companionship. Aya, my childhood friend, reached out with gentle persistence. Her presence was a balm, soothing the raw edges of my being. With her, I rediscovered laughter, a sound I thought had been lost to me. One evening, as we sat in a cozy corner of our favorite cafe, Aya looked at me with a knowing sadness. "You still love him, don't you?" Her words were a mirror, reflecting the truth I had buried deep. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Then why did you leave?" She pressed gently, her eyes urging me to unravel the tangled threads of my heart. I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I thought I was protecting him. The truth. It's like a shadow that looms over me, Aya. It's something I couldn't bear to let him face." Aya listened, her silence a comforting presence. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is trusting someone with the truth. You owe it to both of you to be honest, even if it's painful. Her words lingered with me, echoing in the quiet of my nights. Could I really face Kaido again, knowing the impact my confession would have? The thought terrified me, yet a part of me yearned for release from the burden I carried. The decision weighed heavily on my heart, but as the days turned into weeks, a resolve took root within me. I needed to speak to him, to lay bare the secrets that had driven us apart. The path to redemption was fraught with uncertainty, but it was a journey I had to undertake, for both our sakes. With trembling fingers, I composed a message to Kaido. My heart raced as I hit send, the words now out of my control, I didn't know what awaited us, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the fear. As the cherry blossoms began to fall, carpeting the streets in a delicate pink, I waited. The air was thick with anticipation, each passing moment stretching into eternity. My heart knew that this meeting would be a turning point, a chance to confront the past and perhaps find a way forward.